Hi, everybody. This is Grant at Cause Artist. Welcome to Intelligence for Good. Over the last decade, through Cause Artist and the Disruptors for Good and Investing in Impact podcasts, I've had the opportunity to interview hundreds of founders, investors, nonprofit leaders, and innovators working to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. But over the past few years, one topic has rapidly moved from the sidelines to the center of almost every conversation: artificial intelligence. AI is already transforming how we work, learn, build companies, access healthcare, educate students, and solve global problems. Yet for many people, the conversation has become dominated by fear, confusion, and speculation. We hear about jobs being replaced, existential risks, and massive technological disruption. What we hear far less about are the people using AI right now to improve lives, strengthen communities, expand opportunity, and tackle some of humanity's most pressing challenges. That's why I created Intelligence for Good. This podcast explores the intersection of artificial intelligence, innovation, philanthropy, entrepreneurship, and social impact. Each episode features leaders who are building, funding, researching, and deploying AI in ways that create meaningful benefits for people and communities around the world. For our inaugural episode, I'm honored to welcome Andrew Sweet, Vice President of Innovation at the Rockefeller Foundation. Andrew leads the Foundation's AI partnerships and strategy portfolio and sits at the intersection of technology, philanthropy, government, and global development. Before joining Rockefeller, he served as a presidential appointee at USAID during the Obama administration, worked with Dalberg advisors across Africa and the United States, and began his career as a Peace Corps volunteer in Togo, West Africa. At the Rockefeller Foundation, Andrew is helping shape how AI can be deployed to address challenges in agriculture, healthcare, education, workforce development, and public services. What's particularly fascinating is that the Rockefeller Foundation has a unique connection to the history of artificial intelligence itself. In 1955, the foundation funded the Dartmouth Summer Research Project on artificial intelligence, the conference where the term artificial intelligence was first coined and where many of the field's earliest pioneers gathered to imagine what was possible. 70 years later, Rockefeller finds itself once again helping shape the future of AI, this time focused on ensuring the technology serves humanity and expands opportunity rather than deepening inequality. In this conversation, Andrew and I discuss AI for smallholder farmers, the future of education, AI literacy, entrepreneurship, public services, global development, and why some of the most exciting applications of AI are happening far beyond Silicon Valley. Let's dive in.
Awesome, Andrew. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this inaugural episode of Intelligence for Good is what I'm going to call it and what I'm going to go with. I've interviewed, thousands of people over the years across many different sectors, and all of a sudden AI is upon us and there's a lot of discourse, good, bad, but also maybe a lot of confusion around a lot of things. So I want to start with your journey a little bit before the Rockefeller Foundation, everything you guys are doing. And ironically, you guys were sort of at the birth of it 75 years ago.
I'll start just briefly with a career. I think, I've always been inspired by big problems and, always wanted to have experience outside of my own country. And so the first thing I did was join the Peace Corps. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Togo, West Africa as an ag extension agent and with zero ag experience. And so, but I was plopped into a village with like 200 people and a bike and a stove and said, this is your hut. See you 2.5 years later. And so those types of that experience has always been the most important experience I've ever had. And, as with a lot of Peace Corps volunteers, we're drawn to public service. And so, I spent some time at a think tank thinking through the future of U.S. global development policy, always with kind of my experience in Togo. And then I had a great opportunity to join USAID as a political appointee during the Obama administration. And so I joined the Obama administration to first work on conflict issues in West Africa, and then eventually became the senior advisor to the head of USAID, Raj Shah. So for a few years, I spent, going everywhere with him, to congressional testimony, to Djibouti, Lebanon, like
Wow.
Congo. Every week we were in a different place, and so that was an incredible opportunity and a very different opportunity from the Peace Corps, where I got to understand how large bureaucracies run, but also meeting people I had never imagined I would meet, and was just really being grateful for those opportunities. Moved to South Africa to do some consulting at a company called Dalberg, and led the South Africa office for about 5 years. And then when the pandemic started, Raj Shah, my boss, was now the president of the Rockefeller Foundation. And so Raj said, "Hey, I want you to come to Rockefeller and to lead the pandemic response." When the pandemic was dying down, we sat down and we said, "Okay, what's next?" And in part because we have this great symbiotic relationship, in part because we both like solving big problems, but mainly because of geography, that I'm actually based in San Francisco. We said, "Hey, why don't we double down on what we're doing in AI and really think through how we can be effective?" And that was just immediately after the ChatGPT moment in November of 2022. And so part of the great thing about working at the Rockefeller Foundation is we have an incredible history over the past 115 or so years. There have been a lot of moments that have kind of been where the foundation and its employees have been ahead of the times. One of them that's less known is this moment in 1955 when we received a proposal from an academic at Dartmouth named John McCarthy. And in the proposal, John McCarthy coined the term artificial intelligence. So the term artificial intelligence was coined in a proposal to the Rockefeller Foundation in 1955. He asked for $12,000. And we said, "You know what, John, this idea is pretty out there about getting computers to think at the level or beyond the level of humans. We like your boldness and vision, but we're going to cut it to 7,500. And so in 1956, we supported I think it was a 10-week Dartmouth Summer Conference in Artificial Intelligence. And that included all of the luminaries in computer science at the time. So Marvin Minsky, who's kind of one of the godfathers of information theory, Claude Shannon, which Anthropic named Claude after, was there, and John McCarthy. So this year is the 20th, this year is the 70th anniversary of that conference. And on the 29th and 30th of October, we're going to do a 70th anniversary conference with Dartmouth, bringing together today's AI luminaries to reflect on what has happened over these 70 years and how can we make sure that AI serves humanity and doesn't create further divisions within our societies.
Pretty incredible story. I want to talk about where we at now with the Rockefeller Foundation. Maybe what's the mandate, from your point of view, from your team's point of view? How do you look at the landscape, this sort of commercial hit where everybody started to understand and being able to use it, right, from a commercial standpoint is powerful. What's your sort of mandate right now at the Rockefeller Foundation? What are you guys working on? What do you think is the most important thing right now to work on?
So my mandate, being the only Rockefeller person based in San Francisco, is primarily around relationship building. And so part of the mandate post ChatGPT moment was develop relationships with these companies, build trust, and connect them to our partners solving problems around the world. And so, being 115 years old isn't always seen as a good thing, because it can be seen as, you're stodgy, you're out of date.
Yeah.
But the reality around this moment is that we've established an incredible set of relationships with governments, with nonprofit partners, with people that are intimate with the problems that we care most about. And so what I've found, Grant, is that yes, some of these nonprofit partners would like grant funding from us to have resources to solve problems. But a lot of what they want is access to this technology. They see the game-changing potential of the technology and helping them to solve problems. If they're based in Nairobi, or if they're based in Kampala or Bangalore, they may not necessarily have the relationships that my mandate is to build in San Francisco. So the initial calls that I got from our partners were not, "Hey, can I get a grant for this?" It's, "Hey, do you know somebody here? Can you connect me here?" So one of the best examples of this grant is one that was actually focused in the impact report. It's a partner of ours called Digital Green. And Digital Green's been around for about 20 years. It spun out of a project at Microsoft Research with the idea of how can we improve ag extension for farmers around the world. And this, as we were talking about earlier, is kind of near and dear to my heart as someone who dabbled in ag extension for the first 2 years of my career with zero experience in rural Togo. And so what they said was, hey, we actually don't want funding from you. We would love we would love a connection to OpenAI. This was summer of 2023. So I said, yeah, sure, we can do that. We're agnostic with our partners. I'm never going to say like, you have to work with this partner. We're kind of responsive to our nonprofit partners. And so we made that connection. OpenAI deployed some engineers to build this chatbot called Farmer Chat. And in December of 2023, Sam Altman announced Farmer Chat at the first ever developer day for OpenAI. And it just it gives you a sense of how quickly things move, how relational things are. Fast forward to, June 2026, almost 2 million farmers are using Farmer Chat across 6 countries in 16 different languages. And they have the goal of reaching 4 million by next year. So
quickly, for those
yeah,
who aren't aware about Farmer Chat, exactly what does it do?
yeah.
Like, what is it for farmers?
It's an application where you can ask the app anything that's on your mind. You can take a picture of a crop and say, hey, what's wrong with this? You can say, hey, how can I make a pesticide that will help address this issue with the crop? It'll say, okay, maybe I want to buy it. What is the nearest store where I can go and buy this pesticide? It's essentially an ag extension agent for every farmer in their pocket. And so part of the problem with ag extension, as I witnessed firsthand, is there aren't enough ag extension agents around the world, right? A lot of times the ratio it can get to like high as like 1 to 5,000 in developing countries. And for communities that are fully dependent on agriculture for livelihood, that's kind of a dangerous ratio. So what we're saying is let's have a personal ag extension agent in the pocket of every farmer, so that at any point in time when they have an issue, they can ask questions and get immediate responses. It's just kind of it's a transformational tool, and it flips this narrative on the head ground a little bit about AI is going to take jobs away. What we're saying is, what are the challenges where there aren't enough people to solve these problems? In healthcare and community health workers where there aren't enough. Like, how can we make sure that the technologies that exist are solving those problems where there's serious, critical talent gaps? And because so agriculture is definitely one of those.
Part of why I wanted to do this show was because there's a lot of noise around job loss, around AI is sort of, evil's obviously a strong word, but there's a lot of negative connotations towards the industry right now. And rightfully so. You could argue some of the leaders have not done a great job of presenting AI in a way that people can understand it, digest it, and say, okay, how can this help me? How can this help our local economy, global economy even? To, like you said, not take jobs, but add maybe different jobs to the economy, enable billions of people to do things that they weren't able to do before, that then in turns, creates new jobs, or whatever it might be.
And I would say, Grant, I would say the dynamic is quite different in developing countries as it is from our own country. And so, for example, every year there's a global AI summit. This year the summit was the first ever global AI impact summit in India. And the dynamic in that conversation was very different. It was the quote that I liked that stuck with me the most is, we're not concerned about misuse. We're concerned about misuse. How can we make sure that this wave of technology is benefiting us, and we are proactively identifying those solutions rather than think through, some of the more tangential concerns. And so that really resonated with me. And I think there is, we talk, this is a little bit generic of a term, but we do talk about leapfrogging. And I think in many cases, the opportunity that AI provides in developing countries to be more democratic, to reach more people, to flip that narrative, I think it's quite compelling. There's more energy, there's more optimism around the application of artificial intelligence in those contexts.
Do you see, when you talk to whether it's global policymakers or government or nonprofit founders or for-profit founders globally, do they have a hard time? Is there any disconnect locally from their countries with the models that are, let's say, just OpenAI, Anthropic, US based? Is there any is like, let's go India, for example. Do they want to use local models to maybe develop certain things? I guess how does that? It can be it's starting to be a discussion more and more about isolated models, and if we're only using two globally, that could be an issue, right? But do you see that there maybe India or any other country are saying, hey, let's invest in our local developers, build a local model to to do some of these projects?
I think there's the term that you hear most around this topic is AI sovereignty. How can you make sure that the data sits within the country, that the
Yeah.
models are owned, that the languages within that country are represented in the model? And so I would say the obviously China is doing a lot of work with this. We saw how big the release of DeepSeek was. I think it was last January when that happened. But India's a country that it's very confident in not only its capabilities but its vision for the future. Right? If you look at a lot of even the major American tech companies, they're run by
Yep.
Indians. The university ecosystem in India is incredible. The IITs. So they're pumping out these engineers, and I think frankly a lot of them are deciding to stay in India right now. And so you have competitors to the large American companies that are emerging in India and that are focused on adding languages, making it more inclusive, making it more democratic. And I think that will continue to be a key theme, not only in China and India, but around the world. One of the things that we did early on was we had a big convening in the fall of 2024 where we brought together all our nonprofit partners and our kind of technology partners, OpenAI, Anthropic, NVIDIA. As a result of that, I went to NVIDIA and I had some meetings over there, talked about the need for AI sovereignty in Africa. Out of those conversations, there was a partner called Cassava Technologies that said, hey, we're going to buy these H200s. We're going to buy these GPUs and create the first AI factory for Africa. So now in Cape Town, there's a large data center with 2,000 GPUs the purpose is to serve Africa, right? And that's the opening salvo. They have plans to expand to, I think, 5 more countries. But a lot of the countries now are saying, Graham, we want to own our AI future.
Yep.
We want the sensitive data that exists in our country on financial flows, on health proprietary information. We don't want that information to leave. And we want AI to help improve how we manage our systems. So this AI sovereignty piece is becoming quite a big issue. And I think a big transformation has been the establishment of the first AI factory in Africa in Cape Town, which became operational a couple of months ago.
Wow. And a lot of both OpenAI and Anthropic, they have invested quite a bit of resources into grants, and I don't know if that's credits, right? When you introduce your partners or make introductions, are they asking for just, can you grant us certain token size? Or is it more, hey, can you help us build this? Or is it, hey, we're going to build this. We just need, we would like to grant us tokens. I guess how's that impact sort of grant making happening within this token ecosystem, let's call it?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is sometimes our partners would tell us that the relationships that we facilitate are more consequential than the grant money. And so we have a partnership in Rwanda, for example, with a group called Rising Academies. And they're using AI to help teachers with their lesson plans. They're helping teachers to more effectively grade papers, but also serving as a tutor for students. I went and saw that in April of last year. And it's great. Like it's going very well. The government of Rwanda is very supportive of the work. And I went and visited with Anthropic last year. And it was kind of funny. They're like, Rockefeller, like, thank you for the grant money. But actually, Anthropic, what you're doing with your credits and what they do is they have like a weekly conversation so that the engineers on the Rising Academies team can ask any questions of the engineers on the Anthropic team. So having access to that best in class technical capability and being consistent, that has transformed the technology. And I think that's a great example of kind of, as Anthropic would put it, beneficial deployment. Similarly, we have a partnership with Governor Moore in Maryland on benefits access. And so a number of Marylanders have lost their jobs in part due to what's happening at the federal government. A lot of those folks were employed in the federal government and no longer have their jobs. There's, I think, 1.3 million people that receive public benefits. And, I think part of what we're trying to do is to not diagnose about what may happen, but be prepared. So if AI does in fact lead to job loss in the United States, that the social safety net has been strengthened before that happens. And so we introduced AI to what they call Maryland benefits. And so the 900 people in Maryland that are constantly responding to requests about benefits, a lot of times that information is quickly out of date. So they can use that chatbot to better respond to citizens and be more rapid in their response. And then eventually by the end of the year, we're going to launch with Maryland Benefits a public-facing chatbot so that at any point in time, any Marylander can go into that system, ask what the state of their benefits are, put in their information, and there may be even an agent that actually submits the application on their behalf. So just making it more seamless, making benefits access and delivery more human-centered as we all go through these painful processes with our own public institutions.
It's such a mind bender too, because, let's say you have AI maybe displacing some jobs. It will happen, no doubt, right? This what happens with every evolution in technology or even an industrial revolution. But at the same time, that AI helps build better access to the benefits that people get for whether it's earned employment, whether it's Social Security, whether it's your Medicare benefits. Turnout, a company just raised $40 million doing this, basically making the benefits ecosystem accessible for like senior citizens, right? Or just non-native, a tech person that's, a little bit older. It makes it easier for them to understand. My grandma's 95 years old. She lives by herself in a community, and her life is dedicated to just like dealing with healthcare providers. And they have a person that comes like once a month and helps them out. But look, she's got an iPhone. Like she texts me and Grammy emojis and stuff. Like she's native, and so I do see the impact of like AI can help enable older citizens and just people needing benefits to access it easier, help it even understand it more. At the same time, it sort of creates that unemployment at some level too. So it's definitely the shift that's happening that's odd and interesting. But I think at the end of the day, it will have a net benefit effect.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing, so there's the benefits in making sure that people like your grandmother can, as easily as possible access the information she needs to be effective. Because I think so much stress in our system is focused on navigating these archaic, complex systems, and how can AI help improve that? I think the other thing that's almost the opposite of that, but complementary, is how can we make sure that young people have the skills and confidence to succeed in this AI era? Because I think we don't want to get in the prediction game about AI is going to do this to this group of people. I think predictions are typically fraught. And so what we are trying to do is to prepare for eventualities. And so, for example, in West Virginia, we have this really great partnership with Governor Morrisey, with an ed tech group called Thunkable, and with Marshall University. And Graham, what we're trying to do there, and what we are doing there, is we've identified a number of schools in coal country where the governor said, we need to rethink the future of skills for these people. And we need to do it early. So at high school level, we've started a program with these initially 5 schools in 5 counties, but
Yes.
planning to roll it out to all 55 counties in West Virginia by the end of the year, where Marshall University, who's led by a guy named Brad Smith, who used to be the CEO of Intuit, so it's very tech forward, said, hey, we need to bring these skills to West Virginians. So what they have done is they created a credentialing program. So these students in these 5 schools go through a 15-week program where they learn to code. So anybody can do this now through vibe coding and all these amazing tools where they learn to build applications to solve problems in their own community that they're facing every day. So not only is that a benefit, but there's also this thing where after they go through this 15-week program, they get a micro credential to Marshall University at high school.
Love it.
You can go to Marshall University with a half a college credit already and confidence that you can do this. Or if you decide not to go to college, you can put this on your LinkedIn, you can put this on your resume that you have this credential from Marshall University, that you have this skill set. So part of it is rather than overwhelming, and I think you got it right, Grant, earlier, where sometimes the narrative from the tech leaders has been overwhelming about, all this dramatic transformation. I just need to like put food on the table. I don't even know what AI is. Is it like a glorified Google search? Like what is it?
Right.
But so how can, instead of being overwhelmed, create a sense of agency, create a sense of fluency? Like, okay, I think I can understand this technology. I see how it's practical in my own life. I'm going to use it to solve my own problems, maybe create a business. I think there's a huge opportunity on entrepreneurship where you say, I don't have an HR team. I don't have a finance background, but I can actually make a financial model with these tools like that. And so what we're seeing is this kind of this era of like, solo entrepreneurs that are creating opportunity. There's a really interesting partnership that was announced with Anthropic and Workday and Lisk, where they're actually supporting these solo entrepreneurs to create new opportunities using artificial intelligence, knowing that you don't have to have all of these skills in order to do this because you can get a lot of the capacity from artificial intelligence. My point being is it's good to do this earlier in one's career, and it's good to inspire rather than overwhelm around artificial intelligence because it's not going away. You can't wish AI away. There was this, thing that was signed by a bunch of leaders a few years ago where we need to stop the technology that Elon Musk and others signed. That it ain't going to happen. So we have to deal with it. And how can we deal with it in a way that doesn't overwhelm Americans? How can we tell the stories about what it is, its applications, while being clear-eyed about what some of the issues may be?
It kind of reminds me of we're old enough to remember when the Microsoft Office suite came out, and even the Adobe Creative Suite. Like I had to learn all those tools, and I think these tools are very similar. Like if I remember filling out a job application, hey, are you proficient in Microsoft Office? And if you said no, then you probably wouldn't get the job. And I think it's the AI literacy is going to be like that. Are you proficient in ChatGPT or Claude or whatever the platform might be for that specific job? I think the literacy part is super important. I think having this training in high school is on par. It should be STEM. You need to add a STEM AI, right? You need to add that proficiency as early as possible because that is going to be what employers ask for. Are you proficient in this? If you're not, then I think it's going to be the same thing as Microsoft Office and all these other systems that came out, 2 decades ago. It, and so I do think that it's great to see universities get involved, high schools get involved, because it is, I think as people learn early on, then you have that spark of inspiration of, hey, I could build stuff now. A Stripe report, I think a few months ago just came out and said Stripe Atlas, their sort of the ability to create a US LLC through their platform went up like 8x over the last year because, and they're all solo entrepreneurs, right? Because like you said, you can use these vibe coding tools to build something you never thought you could build before, build something that your local community needs even. It doesn't even have to be that big. It just has to be something that people want and are looking for. And you can actually do that now. No matter what you're proficient in or not proficient in, you can learn very, very quickly. And so that learning curve to me has decreased immensely, which is a very, very powerful thing.
Absolutely. And I think part of what we have to do is to ensure that how can we make sure that AI doesn't become politicized in the way in which so many things in our society can easily become politicized. And so that's why I'm encouraged by these two examples. Like you have West Virginia and you have Maryland. One is being led by a Republican governor, another is being led by a Democratic governor. How can you make sure that all the politicization of everything that's happening in our country, that artificial intelligence doesn't get kind of caught into those camps. I think that's kind of obviously we're just a foundation in that space, but we're helping with the narrative across the country to show how everyday Americans can solve everyday problems.
And what's also interesting parallel there too is that you have Maryland, very government heavy workforce. Traditionally, you would not say maybe that workforce is as technically savvy as other industries. Likewise, in West Virginia, the mining workers and sort of that they're sort of in this in parallel. They're in the same position where the first round of technology sort of did not train them properly. There just wasn't systems in place. And not that they fell behind, it's just that now there is the ability to catch up very rapidly for those two industries. So that's kind of interesting too, because they're kind of in a similar spot.
I agree, and I think part of the new dynamic, right, too, is there you know foundations like Rockefeller are critical in the sense that I think we bring objectivity and credibility to some of this work, but what we're going to now see is this massive influx in philanthropic resources, in part due to the new entrants into the space. So there was a paper or a Substack that was out there a couple of weeks ago saying that there's going to be, I think, between 37 and $100 billion of new philanthropic capital every year that's going into this space. That's an incredible opportunity if it actually does flow to the problems that are most critical and that we care about. So how can we effectively deploy those resources to the problems that need it the most? And so the money is coming from the OpenAI Foundation. It's coming from Anthropic. I think all of the 7 co-founders of Anthropic have committed to giving away around 80% of their wealth. And they have one of the most ambitious matching programs in history for employees that want to do the same. So how can we make sure that those resources are actually deployed and they're going to things that actually impact everyday Americans? Because I think if we have this continued split of this technology is making this subclass of Americans incredibly wealthy and other Americans aren't benefiting from the technology, that doesn't bode well for the social tissue of our society. I think there need to be some tangible, they have to say, this is a breakthrough in health that occurred due to artificial intelligence, something that's real for your 95-year-old grandma, right? So it's not just, this glorified Google search. It's actually applications to solve real human problems that otherwise wouldn't have been solved.
Yeah, the wealth divide could be a real problem in the next decade or two. But I think if done correctly, we can actually see AI lessen the gap because I do think you can create wealth where it hasn't happened before for individuals who didn't have the opportunity or weren't capable before. I think that is the real opportunity is to lessen the wealth gap with AI. And that's a conversation that's not being talked about. It's only about the divide, which obviously there's going to be moments that are like that, but if we show that the possibility is there, that unlike ever before, you can build something and change your life pretty rapidly. So I'm optimistic, and I know that that's not usually a place where people are within the AI industry, but I think everything that you have mentioned and talked about, I don't see being talked about enough around the opportunities that AI enables versus the opportunities that it kills. I'll end a little bit on this, on the future. And y obviously, you're talking to some of the best companies, best people in the industry. What would you like to see over the next 3 to 5 years from the Rockefeller Foundation? What are some of the goals and successes you and the team would like to achieve?
Yeah. I think what we've started to do and what we've seen now is that we can have real impact with quantifiable metrics in our work. And so we kind of know how to do this stuff now, right? I think, 4 years in, I think there are some actual real impact numbers, including the impact numbers that I mentioned from Digital Green. Last month, I was in Cali, Colombia, with the mayor of Cali and with the local university assessee. We created a tool called Dengue AI. And Cali, Colombia has been inundated with dengue, and it's really ravaged them, particularly with the impact of climate change over in recent years, where they, in our initial call, they kept on talking about rain bombs that were devastating the city. And after all these rain bombs, there'd be dengue outbreaks. So we partnered with the city and the university, not big tech, by the way, like OpenAI and Anthropic, none of them were involved in this. It was all like data scientists within the mayor's office, partnering with the local university. When I was with the mayor, we announced the results. They can now predict dengue outbreaks 3 weeks in advance with a 93% degree of confidence. And so that's happening in Cali. So part of what we're talking about is, why is this only in Cali? Why isn't this across Colombia? Why isn't this across South America? Why isn't this global? And so where those proof points exist, where those partnerships, those hard earned results, all the tensions that exist as you're doing these things, all the tough decisions, we need to make sure that that knowledge gets out there and that we can scale these quickly. In part because it's just the right thing to do and you're actually solving a real problem, but in part because I think it lessens the anxiety a little bit around public opinion about what artificial intelligence may do to their livelihoods. So I think part of it is taking a step back and thinking about where the impact has happened and how can we make sure that we scale that impact as much as possible. So I think that's programmatically, that's a big piece. I think a second thing that needs to happen is on the narrative. As you and I were discussing earlier, there need to be more voices out there that don't have a financial incentive to say one thing or another, that can credibly and objectively say, this is what's happening. And these are some of the scenarios that we may face as a society. But right now, there's a lot of noise, and a lot of the noise is being dominated by people that benefit the most from the technology. And so who are the voices that need to be out there to tell Americans, to tell people around the world, and have an honest conversation with them? It's almost like the FDR fireside chats during World War II. You know, who is that person? Who are those people? And the media environment is obviously very different than it was in the 40s, but I think we can draw inspiration from how he level set, how he humanized the war, how he rationalized the war to Americans who were very war weary for a number of years. I think that's a second piece. And a third piece is how can we really transform how public services are provided? I think
Huge.
everywhere around the world, and maybe most acutely in the United States, we're frustrated with the level of service. We're frustrated with the time, the complexity. It's almost like the system has been built to make us frustrated
To
and
not work for us.
to not work for us. And so how can we reimagine the public sector? And how can we reimagine the benefits work that we had talked about? How can we reimagine just what the relationship between citizens and government look like? How can we redefine the social contract? How can we instill confidence that our government can still provide for our most vulnerable people? And I think, we are in the game of optimism, rational optimism. And what are those opportunities and how can we accelerate them and how can we communicate them? I'd say those are kind of three areas that I'm personally excited about. And maybe the fourth one is, how can we make sure that the new wealth that is being created can be deployed to help solve problems that are real and tangible for everyday Americans, and not only go to increased inequalities between the world's first trillionaire and more people that are falling into into poverty every year. That dynamic is not going to work. So how can we think creatively about deploying those $37 to $100 billion each year in new resources so that people are optimistic about the future and not overwhelmed by the narrative?
Amazing, Andrew. Thank you so much for taking the time. Amazing conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much.